Rima Basharnitsan, the founder and CEO of Dialogue. Welcome to 10 by 20, a series of 10 questions discussed in 20-minute dialogues with local and international leaders doing visionary work at the intersection of people, technology, and society. Welcome back to 10 by 20. Today we welcome our next guest, Abraham Burickson, author of the book Experience Design, a Participatory Manifesto, which comes out this October 2023 from Yale University Press. Abraham is the co-director of Odyssey Works, an educational and performance organization that focuses on experience design and which has a year-long executive experience design certificate program, which is the only one of its kind in the field. Abe also teaches in the experience design faculty and residence program at MICA in Maryland. Welcome, Abe.
Hi, it's really wonderful to be here. I'm glad to finally talk to you on this, in this format, Rima.
Totally. It's so fun to, first of all, talk to people I know, like I was saying, know a little bit, because a lot of times this is the time when I get to know people, and it's not, it's sometimes nerve-wracking, sometimes it's really casual, which is great. So I know that you've got this book coming out. I know that there's lots kind of happening in your life and has been for the past probably 5 years. There's been an acceleration in the field of experience design professionally, but also your family's grown. You've moved a little bit between things. But before we get to all of this, I'd love to know sort of a little bit about your background, back in the day, back when you were a small boy growing up. Where did you grow up? How did you grow up? Who influenced you? And just, I always, especially with people who are thinking about experience design and not in the context of digital, but in the context of truly being physical in spaces with people and objects and buildings. I always wonder how our reality shapes the way that we perceive everything. And I'm especially curious about people that are in the experience design field, how their young, their upbringing, their early years when we were just in this sponge space, where were you absorbing from, and what shaped you now, but back then, if that makes sense.
I mean, that's such a good question. And it's good timing too, because I've had to kind of excavate this question a little bit as I've written the book that's coming out, and think back on that time. I grew up in New York City, which is an experience now and was quite an experience in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. And there were many things about New York which were sort of put you in a kind of, and they put you a little bit on edge, but they also opened up a kind of sense of possibility. I just remember sort of scouting the city with friends and looking for hidden entryways into the Amtrak tunnels to go find the right graffiti, or or spaces, hidden spaces in parks. And I never thought about that as a kind of beginning of a training in thinking about experience design, the quality of discovery that was there in the city. It led me both to be an architect, which is actually my training, and to be an experience designer in many ways. But I would take these trips when I was a teenager, and I didn't put it together until recently how foundational this was for me. I take these trips with this woman who was old, ancient, she was, I don't know, hundreds of years old. She always seemed that way. I mean, her eyes were way back in her head. And she would take a group of teenagers, Americans and Mexicans, often together. She lived between the US and Mexico, and on these trips, but they weren't ordinary trips. They were very well, experience designed, I would say now. Back then, of course, we didn't have a term for that. We took this one trip through Mexico. We had a caravan of cars, I don't know, 5 cars, 6 cars, something like that. And it was about half teenagers and half grown-ups. And she gave us all the responsibility. We had to drive the cars. We managed the money. We dealt with the food. We dealt with the maps. And we didn't know how. It was stick shifts. We didn't know how to drive stick shift. We learned to drive on those cars. We destroyed them. We set the cars on fire. The road washed out. We had to deal with it. One girl dropped the keys in the alligator pit, and we had to figure out how to go in and get it. And and everything was real. Do you know what I mean? Everything felt,
Mhm.
you take a tour, everything is completely padded. In this condition, everything was so much so that I remember once I was the navigator and I was in the front car. And so she was in the front car with me. And she said, get everybody lost. I said, what? She said, do it. Just get everybody lost right now. And so I had, I had to deal with all the ire of everybody because things were being a little too comfortable. She made sure that our journey was not 100% comfortable. And so we would arrive at places with this sense of real arrival, not like, oh, the next stop is, but like actually having traveled to actually arrive with difficulty at a place with a sense of openness to that place. She prepared us in a certain sense for it. And one of the places that we arrived at was the Mayan ruins of Palenque. I don't know if you know this, but it's a little like smaller Chichen Itza.
Yes.
And but it's in the jungle. I mean, it's like really lush there, gorgeous there. And so she took us in. She took us like right in. We didn't, they bought the tickets or whatever you have to do. She took us right in past. We didn't stop and get any pamphlets or read any didactics or anything. She took us in. A bunch of teenagers were already prepared for a heightened experience because of the struggle it had been to make it there.
Yeah.
Right. She probably took us on back roads and she could have taken the highway. I don't know. Right. But we got there and we were dropped off, and she dropped us right in the middle of the ruins and said, what would it be like to be one of these people? What would it be like to grow up here, live here, for this to be your life? And that was it. And then she set us loose. And it was psychedelic, to be honest.
Yeah.
Right. And the whole thing, I look back on all the elements of the trip she prepared for us. How did that become a psychedelic experience? I went back years later and, it was a bunch of ruins, nice ruins, interesting ruins. There's a lot to learn, but it wasn't this kind of, unless you're doing psychedelics, it wasn't a psychedelic experience. But there it was. And it was life-changing. I really immersed myself in this question because she had prepared me, and she prepared the whole cohort and built a community around the question. That was another thing that was so brilliant about her experience design, was the way she understood that in community we make a world, and when we make a world, another way of being is possible. She knew that.
Wow.
So that was very I didn't put it together until recently that this was like so foundational in my experience design practice.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the architecture piece too, right? It's like a stepping stone into the realm of where you're at now. And how big of a role did architecture play in your like professional world before you stepped into experience design as its own practice?
Yeah, I mean, I do still, I worked as an architect for a long time. I worked in big firms, little firms. For myself, I still have, I've rebooted my experiences, my architecture practice in the past few years as an experience design architecture practice called the Long Architecture Project. And for me, I realized this is what I've been building towards, no pun intended, all this time, right? The question of, how could I think much more broadly about architecture as an experiential thing? There are ideas out there, right? There's this idea of performativity. There are architects who've thought brilliantly about how buildings, how homes, how institutions, how public space can be considered not necessarily just from the point of view of all the stuff in it, but from the point of view of the experience it facilitates. It's hard for a lot of architects because there's something, you have to be a little bit humble, right? You have to say, I'm not the be all end all. What really matters is what people bring, the life people bring to this. And that's a kind of uncontrollable thing. We're really creating spaces of possibility, not specifically buildings necessarily. My architecture practice is really about that. It says if you build a home, which is an incredible outlay of resources, and I've mostly focused on residential work in my practice for the last, 15 years. If you build a home, it's an incredible outlay of resources, and we usually start too late. We already start with all the answers. We start with how many rooms do you want? Where's the bathroom going to be? We don't ask, okay, if we're going to make this huge investment of time, of energy, of social capital within a family, within a community, it's enormous when you really think about it. Why aren't we stepping back and saying, what do we want to design for our lives? What effect do we wish to have on the world? How might we align our life goals with this goal? Because it is one of the most powerful interventions so many of us are involved in at some point in our lives. I've been thinking about this morning, today, all day, I've been thinking about sustainability and this problem of, this problem of efficiency. And there's all these studies where, you make things more efficient, people just use more of it, right? And it's this kind of, it's this you can't win thing, right? And it seems to me, of course, efficiency is very important, and making things, getting rid of incandescent bulbs and changing them out for LEDs was great, especially now that they're so much better. But it raises the question: what if we created an experience that facilitated a lifestyle where we behaved differently, where we wished to behave differently, where we saw the world differently? Many of us wish to behave differently. Many of us wish to have a better impact on the environment with our work, with our homes, with everything. But we're in a world that doesn't support that. Experience design says we can design the world. Let's start there, and then think about how many bedrooms they're going to be and where they're going to be located.
Yeah, for sure. I have so many questions, but we only have so much, which is so much time.
I love it.
But when do you find for yourself, like, that you do your most innovative or creative or exciting work? Like, what does that look like for you? Because it all feels like it's a constant creation, right? I'm sure there's heads down, like, strategy and so forth, and like creative thinking, but like, what's like in your day-to-day, like, when do you feel most creative? Or spacious. Maybe that's the right way.
Like 6 a.m. in the bath. It's really good.
Really? You have time to take a bath in the morning?
At 6. Yeah. I wake up before everybody, before the madness begins. Like, okay, let's do this. I did that this morning. Very creative time. So that totally isolated, solo, clear mind time. And then on the other end, in collaboration with good collaborators, with the door closed. Do you know what I mean? Like, with the door closed and the watches and the clocks covered. That's just a kind of brilliant time. And for me, it generally centers around building a diagram. That is my sort of strongest thought process system, because I find that big, complex concepts are much easier to describe graphically.
Definitely.
Easier to communicate and share graphically, rather than sitting around and sort of explaining it on and on.
Yeah. Well, and the heads down time is just always, it's just good to be in a vacuum with the right people to be able to birth the thing that you're working on collectively.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What have you seen either as a result of what are some of the ways that the work's shown up after the fact? Like, are there any sort of impacts of the work that you've been seeing, especially with your students in the certificate program? Like, I'm wondering, I have this like big question of like, who's the most surprising person that's taken the program thus far? Like, that you were just like, really? Don't you, whatever that thought was. But separately from that, because that matters less to me, I'm more interested in like, what was there for them after? Like, what was that did they have an aha? How did they implement the work? Have you implemented the work, like, in general? Like, what have you seen are some of the results of and shifts that people have experienced or organizations have experienced?
Yeah. So this is like why I wrote a book, because I want that to happen to more people. There's one guy, Jerome, who works at Meow Wolf, and he's a technologist, and he came in and he said he had this question, like, we create the technology and people are just looking at the technology. How can we make it not just people looking at the technology. And isn't this the problem with VR, with so much tech? You know, you're just like, it's all about the tech. Well, the tech is doing something. It's a tool for something. What is it about? So he came with this question, and he left. I said, how are you with this question? He said, well, I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of vocabulary and modes of thinking about it. But really, right now, I'm just saying experience design is everywhere. It's blowing my mind. That's the direct quote. That's what he said to me. And I was like, oh, right. And so I see him now. He's out there. He's trying to change the way they work, right? He's trying to, you know, Meow Wolf is probably a kind of an epicenter for this kind of experiential business model, right? And he's saying, no, we need to think about, for instance, how narratives work in the mind of the audience. We're spending all this time thinking about how narratives, what's the backstory? What's our meta narrative? What did we write? What makes sense of all this? When we're using it to make sense of things for ourselves, and we're leaving clues, but if people find them, if they don't, that's, you know, we hope they do. You know, but saying now we need to have things start with the experience of the narrative in people's minds, right? I'm going out to Meow Wolf really soon to kind of work with them on this question. So they're bringing that there. We have surprising people. We have scientists, like multiple scientists. Like, why are they? You know, even that isn't the first place I would think of going. We have one scientist who started taking our work and then started taking our programs and was in the certificate program.
Oh, good.
And she developed this whole practice of creating olfactory experiences, right? Because she works with scent. She's at the Genome Project in New York, and she started building these experiences, especially through pandemic, of mortality through smell, and how do we face these things? Looking at the kind of molecular chemistry of our experiences. We had another scientist who created this, I don't even know how to describe it. It's the hat you put on, and it follows all your brain waves as you're going through experiences. He said, well, what is actually happening? How can I apply my how can I apply my engineering? He's an engineer and a scientist. How can I apply my understanding to think about, like, what is actually happening in the brain when we have an experience, and how can I study this, and how could this be something that we could offer people? And so he's building this thing. It's really crazy. You put it on, you walk around and you say, I thought I liked that, but maybe that was just a story, because this is affecting me in a very different way than I thought it was affecting me. We have a banker coming in our current cohort from Wells Fargo saying, look, I'm working on climate change. I have unbelievable resources, but the stuff we do, it's not that effective, even though we throw a lot at it. Maybe we need to start thinking about these things in terms of the experience design of thinking about climate, which goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning, these questions of sustainability. How do we change our experience of the environment? And so she's been focusing on that, and she was trying to bring it back to Wells Fargo. Of course, we have a lot of theater people and artists who come into our programs as well. But there's some of these fascinating outliers.
Oh, amazing. That's so great to hear. I love that. I love that people are thinking, and this is what you wanted, right? Like, people are thinking about experience design as a solution to the problem that isn't directly related to experience design, but in it kind of is. It's tangential to it, and you're impacting in that way.
Right, like it's a meta practice, like, right? Like it overlays on any other practice. It encourages interdisciplinarity. There are people who are doing brilliant experience design things. They may not call it that. Yeah, there's people in human resources.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
They should
think about it.
Yeah.
What power?
They should absolutely be in these classes.
Yeah, many of them are not.
I know. Well, we can talk about that. I know some people that probably would love to do it if they knew the program existed. I think that's the issue, is like they don't get how it connects.
Yeah.
But it connects in obviously very directly. Okay, so we're almost at the end. We've got about a couple minutes. So let's get into this rapid fire moment.
You got it.
When do you feel most connected to others?
How many words do I get?
1 to 2.
In collaboration.
In collaboration. Okay. When and where are you happiest?
With family.
What intersection of disciplines are you currently most fascinated by?
Currently, I'm really interested in where architecture meets behavioral economics, meets graphic design.
What is your greatest regret?
Oh, probably not having kids earlier.
There's a time and place for everything. Remember, it
I
all
know.
happens for a reason.
Earlier.
What's the one thing you wish to pass down to the next generation?
I mean, it's this way of thinking about how you make work, right?
Mm.
And I want to say that I know there's rapid fire, but I do want to say, like, presenting it like it's this new thing. But I actually think the thing-based way of designing, of making, is the new thing that came in.
Yeah.
I don't know, a couple hundred years ago. Really, like when you go back to tradition, when you look at how religions work, when you look at how communities work, when you look at how so many practices evolved, you find that they were basically thinking about things experientially. These rigid sort of divides are very industrial revolution. We need to learn what we learned from that, but also say to the next generation that we can go back and think about things experientially and have a much broader impact.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been such a pleasure, Rima.
Yeah. So fun to talk. Thanks for tuning in to Dialogue's 10 by 20 interview series, where we ask 10 questions in 20 minutes to profile international leaders working at the intersection of people, technology, and society. That's all for today's episode. Like and subscribe below to get notified for our upcoming interviews. Follow us on Instagram at dialogue_co.